Pastor, for setting it up like that. I don't really have to tell you what I'm going to do up here because you laid it all out so nicely there. So thank you. What I would like to do is start with a word of prayer, because this is I think the most overlooked book in the Pentateuch, or what Jews call the Torah. And I remember from my own experience trying to read the Bible through the first time, and I come to this and I felt like I'm just slogging my way through this. I don't really understand any of this, but I'm trying to be faithful, and I don't want you guys to be in that boat. So I'm going to try to give you some practical tips for what to expect and how to understand the book better. But we need God to really help us with that. He's the one who does the teaching, right? And so I'm just a tool, okay? So I want to say a word of prayer, and we'll get right into it, okay? So let's pray. God, we thank you so much for your word, and that we get to read your word, and we don't have to worry about somebody taking our Bible away from us and throwing us in jail for reading the Bible and telling other people about it. Help us not to take that for granted. And whatever we learn when we come to church, help us to have a desire to share that, because you don't want anybody to miss out on what you have in store for them. You want to save all of us, and you've made a path for us to be saved and reconciled with you. And I pray that you'll help us to have a strong desire to tell other people the gospel, because that's what this book is all about really here tonight. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this, and I pray that it will be a help to each person here. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So I've got the title slide up here, and I want to connect where we left off with Exodus. We mentioned Bezalel, and he did all this to build the tabernacle. And what I didn't share with you was the end of Exodus. The tabernacle has just been built, and God resides in the cloud over the tabernacle, or in the tabernacle. And in Exodus 40, verse 35, it says Moses was not able to go into the tabernacle because God's glory filled it. This is where we leave Exodus, and what lays the groundwork for the book of Leviticus, rather. We call it Leviticus because it's about the Levite priest, but the Jews don't call it Leviticus. They call it Vayikra. That's the name of the book in Hebrew, and that's what I want to talk about today. Is why is it called that? What is it about? It's a picture of the gospel. It's the first book in the Bible that tells us about the gospel in detail, not just what Christ has done, but our response, what God expects of us. I'm going to go through these different offerings, the 6 actions. So when you're reading this book, you won't be lost if you think of these same 6 actions that take place, and there's these 5 different offerings. There's different kinds of animals, and there's special rules, and yeah, there's different ceremonies, but every one of these actions and offerings is a picture of what Christ did for us and our response to him, what it's got to be, okay? And so that's what I hope that you'll take away from here. You've got your handout, and I've put a few hints on there as well. So without further delay, I want to go to the next slide here and talk about this Vayikra. I've got the Hebrew Vayikra in big letters there, Leviticus 1:1, and God called unto Moses. And so Exodus 40:35, Moses is not able to go into the tabernacle because God's glory filled it. So Leviticus 1:1 says God called him. He couldn't go in there unless he's invited. And already, just in that phrase, we get the gospel already. You can't come to God on your own merit. You've got to come when he invites you, and he does. He does invite you. You can't come to him on your own merit. He invites you because of who he is, not because of who we are. And we can't come to him. It doesn't mean Moses wasn't allowed. It meant Moses could not possible for him to go into the tabernacle. Not a matter of permission, just flat out not possible for him to go in there. And then Leviticus 1 begins, and God called Moses to come in there, okay? So he was invited. And so that's why it's called Vayikra, because Vayikra means, and he called, right? That's what the book means, and he called. And that's what the whole book is about. And so it's this word call. I mentioned it last time when mentioned Bezalel. The word called is kind of like invitation or summons, and I want to unpack that a little bit, like I said on a Bezalel lesson. It's not the optional kind of invitation to a wedding that you can just, well, I don't really feel like going, I can bail out. It's not optional invitation, but it's also not jury duty where you're mandatory and burdensome and you got to lose time from your job or whatever and you have to be in some hotel or that kind of, it's not that kind. This is, Moses never would have even asked to go into God's presence. He never would have asked because he knew he didn't deserve that. God called him in that context. This is a great honor and a privilege. And yeah, he called him, so you're going to go in there. It's not an optional, oh, never mind. There's nothing flippant about it like that. So it's a pretty strong word that requires a little more explanation than just call. It's not that God just spoke to him and told him to come in. It was a little more involved than that. More than an invitation, not burdensome like a summons, but those words, I think, give the best idea of what it was. Moses would have responded, did respond, this was a privilege and an honor. I never would have asked this, okay? Never would have asked something like that. And I want to share with you Dr. McGee's quick comments. J. Vernon McGee says this about the first 3 books in the Torah. Genesis is man falls from God. Exodus is God redeems man. And this book, Leviticus, is man worships God. That's what this book is about. And as I mentioned before, it's the least appreciated book in the whole Torah. So I got another slide over there about that gives you the outline of the entire book right here, okay? The whole book, and obviously I'm not going to go through all that. Many believers skip over it. I know I did. And then when I felt compelled, I'm going to read the whole Bible, I got to it and I hung in there, but I was lost. I felt like I was lost. I felt like these are just old-timey, outdated ceremonies and rituals that, for whatever reason, God wanted me to know about it. And we don't do this anymore. The Jews don't do this anymore. And I'm just reading this just purely out of being faithful to God, missing what he wanted to teach us and what he has to teach us. And even though it appears, when you open it, it appears to be just some technical manual, as you said, dry, really dry, outdated ceremonies that nobody observes anymore. Even though it seems that, it is one of the most important books of the Bible, and it's not just I'm saying that. Other scholars and other people have said this about the book. And why do I think it's one of the most important is, as I said before, it is the first book in the whole Bible that gives a detailed revelation of the gospel, how God restores lost men to himself, and then also our response, living in glad obedience and holiness. So there's 2 main themes across this entire book. One is atonement, and the word in Hebrew is kind of like our word cover. It's kafar. That word kafar and its variants occur 45 times around there in the whole book of Leviticus. And then the other theme that's really important is holiness. And the word for holiness is kadesh. And that word happens about 87 times in the book of Leviticus. And that, by the way, is more than in any other book of the whole Bible. So I think holiness is definitely a prominent theme of the book of Leviticus there. So what we need to do when we're reading this book is not think about those ritual ceremonies. We need to look at it with the Christ-centered lens. Then it starts to make sense and the light switch comes on and we see how important it is. We see that this book is about God fulfilling our need for atonement of our sins and our response to him, which is living in holiness. That's what this whole book is about, if I could sum it up in a sentence like that. So after atoning for our sin, God, he vayikras us. He calls his people to be holy. Why? Because he's holy. And the next slide, I've got the phrase that is probably one of the most commonly cited passages from the book of Leviticus. In all my years of going to church, I've never heard a series on Leviticus. I've heard people quote from it and give verses from it, but I never had a series on Leviticus in my experience, and maybe you have. But this is probably one of the most commonly cited verses in the whole book of Leviticus there. And in Hebrew, it is kedoshim. There's that word holy. Kedoshim to you, Kadosh, Ani Adonai Elohechem. And what this is saying is, you shall be holy. It's this picture of the gospel here. You will be holy. Does that mean that I'm not now and that it's okay for me just to live like a rat now because God forgives me? Nope, it doesn't mean that. You will be becoming. You are becoming set apart for him. Increasingly set apart for him is what it means. So we just don't have a nice way of putting that that's very tidy for English. But it describes future but present and ongoing. Okay? And you are set apart now for him. You're set apart now. You're holy now. But he's increasing your closeness to him, setting you apart more and more for him as you live on this side of eternity. So that is something that we overlook. I don't think that we really understand what it means. Be holy. It is a command and it is future tense, but what it means is a process. And it doesn't mean that you will be holy one day, that when you die, then you'll finally be holy. It means you're holy now. When you put your trust in him, you're holy right now, and it's ongoing. He's going to make you more and more finely tuned to what he wants you to be. Okay? He goes to work, and you let him, right? That's what the picture is here. So we choose to respond in obedience to him, and he sets us apart for his purpose, even as we wrestle with our sin nature. Okay? That's important, I think, to notice that. So now I want to go into these different actions of the sacrifices. So when you read this book, you're going to read these different offerings, different animals, and it might get overwhelming. But what ties it together, thank goodness, is there are these 6 different actions that take place. Regardless of the offering, regardless of the animal or the flower that's being given, whatever it is that's being given, there's these 6 actions, and fortunately, 5 of them are used all the time, and only 1 is used for one particular case, okay? So if we go to the next slide, these 6 different actions here tell us about what the offerer does, okay? And for each one of these, I'm going to tell you how Christ represents these different actions, what he did, and then our response. So each one of these is very practical. So the first is the presentation of the victim. And these are individual. Leviticus does allow for corporate sacrifices, for example, the Day of Atonement, but it's not just limited to corporate. There's individual sacrifices that are mentioned in here. So the offerer brings the victim so that it may be accepted before the Lord. The presentation is very specific. God says it's got to be at the door of the tent of meeting. It's got to be the way God decides, and it's public. Okay, it's not in some back alley somewhere. It's public. And the victim could be from the herd, so a bull. It could be a sheep or a goat, or it could be a bird, like a turtle dove or a pigeon. God makes a way for everyone to participate, no matter how rich or poor. Not everybody would have a bull, but more people would be able to come up with a pigeon, right? And so he makes a way for everybody, but don't miss this, he still has high standards. There's no blemish, and there's specific instructions that he expects. We can't come to him flippantly. It's very specific. So the application, how does this point to Christ? What did Christ do? Well, Christ, when he was here, he presented himself willingly and publicly to the Father in John chapter 10, verses 17 and 18. And then what's our response? Well, we have to present Christ, not ourselves, because we have no merit. We have to present Christ as our sacrificial victim, and we have to confess him publicly, okay? It's a public thing. So the second one is laying on the hand. At this second part of the offering, the offerer lays his hand on the victim. Why? To mark it, this is my goat, this is my bull or my pigeon or whatever, it's mine, and I'm designating this animal to die, okay? And I'm laying my hand on it. It's transferring, I'm supposed to die, and I'm transferring the obligation for me to die to this animal. This animal is designated to die. The guilt, the payment, the obligation to die transfers from me to this animal there, okay? And so the word samach, it doesn't just mean lay the hand on lightly. It means to lean on heavily, You're everything about you is leaning on this. You're relying entirely on this. There's nothing else to hold you up here. And so it's lean on, and it also has this idea to rest heavily, to lean heavily on you. Know this is going to hold you up and nothing else will. That's what it means to lay the hand on. So it's nothing passive about it at all. And so I think you can kind of tell how Christ fits into this. It says in Isaiah 53, verse 6, the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all, laid it on him, the iniquity of us all. And so then, so our obligation to die for our sin and be permanently separated from God because we're not a worthy sacrifice. He steps up and offers himself. He takes the obligation to pay for my sin. That's what this is picturing here. And then how do I respond? I have to lay my hand on him. I have to lean heavily on him. I have to rely solely on him. He's the only way, and I'm thankful that there is a way, right? I'm thankful that there's a way, and I have to rest and rely solely on Christ for my salvation and remission of my sin. There's no other way. You have to lean hard on that. That's it. Not passively, not flippantly. All of who you are has to rest on that. Then, of course, the third one is killing the victim. Now remember, this is individual offering I'm talking about here. I come up there, I come to the tabernacle, I present my bull or my lamb or goat or pigeon, whatever, and I lay my hand, transfer the obligation for this to die, and then I kill it myself. This is my animal that I've taken care of, and it's the best. It's without blemish. And I present it to God, and I lay my hand on it, rely entirely on this to take my obligation to die, and then I kill it, not the priest. I have to kill it myself, except in the case of the turtle doves and the pigeons. I guess they're different. But so the death is the penalty for sin. And each sacrificial death, of course, foreshadows Christ's death for us. I think it's pretty clear. We caused his death. He chose to die because of us. He knew we couldn't help ourselves, so he did it for himself. And don't miss this, the Bible, nowhere in the Bible does it say that human sacrifice is okay. It's not okay. But he gave himself. It's not the same as what you read there with the human sacrifice and the kamash, that God kamash does that kind of thing. It's not that at all. So the application here, maybe to make it a little clearer, why is death the penalty for sin? I think this is really common sense here. Death is separation from God. God hates sin. He's supreme authority. He created everything. He gets to decide what he wants around him. Doesn't that make sense? I mean, he gets to decide what's around him. In your house, it's your house. You get to decide who's welcome in your house and who's not welcome in your house. You have the right to do that. He gets to decide who's around him and who's not around him. And I don't want to be around sin, so I'm not going to have that around me. He has every right to do that, and we're the ones that make the choice not to be around him. Not he doesn't want to be around us. We don't want to be around him is the reason why we have our sin. His holiness makes it impossible for sin to be in his presence. He doesn't want to be around that. He wants to separate himself because of who he is. So the application about killing the victim here, Jesus, of course, gave his life as a ransom for us. And you can read about this in Matthew 20, Mark 10, and even 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 6. Jesus gave his life. He laid down his life. And then for us, how do we respond? We've got to acknowledge, I caused his death. I caused that. He didn't have to do that, but he did because there was no other way to save me. He bore the penalty for my sin. That's what he did. And we need to acknowledge that. And so then when we get to number 4, the offerer's job is done at this point. The offerer presents the victim, lays the hand, kills. After that, the offerer's part is done. There's no more responsibility for the offerer. God does the rest. The sprinkling of the blood, what does this mean here? So the priest in the book of Leviticus, not the offerer, applies the blood to the altar. What's the altar? The altar is the place where God chooses to give his present, to show himself present. So in other words, applying the blood to the altar means presenting the blood to God for either to accept or not accept, right? That's what it means. That's why there's sprinkling of the blood on the altar. And you'll read about that time and time again. That's what it means. And so Jesus Christ is our sacrificial victim and the high priest. Remember I said the priest sprinkles the blood on the altar. He's the victim. He's our victim with a capital V. And then the sprinkling of the blood, he's our high priest also. He's the victim and the priest. And presenting him as our sacrifice, laying our hand on him, that means relying solely on him for our salvation, that's my responsibility. And acknowledging that I'm the reason for his death, that's my responsibility. After that, I got to leave it in God's hands. There's nothing more that I can do at this point. God takes the blood for remission of my sin. I can't do that. And he does the work of our heavenly priest. Jesus Christ is the high priest. And we have to let that responsibility be God's, because there's nothing that we can do about that. So number 5 here is burning on the altar. And I'll just tell you, in Leviticus, there are 2 verbs that are translated as burn. The one is katar, and the other is saraf. The only word that's used for burning on the altar is katar. And we just say burn in English, but it's not exactly that, okay? And so I'm going to try to unpack that a little bit. And by the way, this word katar in Leviticus, burning on the altar, is always used. Hebrew has this form of causation. It's always used for causation. So what it literally means, not burn, but to smoke, okay? And so what this word katar means in Leviticus, and really elsewhere, it means to cause to smoke. So sure, there's a fire and there's burning, but it's all about the smoke that's going up to heaven there, okay? The other word is saraf. That means destroy. The saraf burned my house down, that kind. It burned, consumed by fire, and that never happens on the altar, and it never happens in the camp where the people are living, okay? It never happens in there. That kind of burning always happens outside, and it's purely for destruction, okay? So this kind of offering that is really, we call it the burnt offering. Maybe you want to call it the smoked offering, because it's more smoke. And the reason why that's important is, what does smoke do? It goes up, right? And so smoke goes up. There's a picture that we're getting here. God wants us to get this picture. Jesus Christ submitted in perfect obedience, completely surrendered to God. That went up. That went up to God the Father. And that's the picture that you get with the burnt offering or the smoked offering on the altar, is that the smoke ascends and it's a sweet aroma to God. That's why it's important to know smoke. So the last one on the list here is the sacrificial meal, and this only happens in the context of the peace offering, which I'll get to. This happens also in the Passover, but in Leviticus it's the peace offering. And this, remember, the actions 4 through 6 is entirely in God's hand. God is the one doing this. So the sacrificial meal, God is the host. He invites us to his table to be with him in fellowship. And so that's what is important about that. It's not the offer. So the application for the sacrificial meal here is, after atonement, after we're right with God, we've got imputed righteousness, he hosts us at his table. The same victim, capital V, that died becomes our food, and fellowship follows forgiveness. Jesus made this comment in John chapter 6, verses 26 to 71. He said, he told his followers to eat his body and drink his blood. And when he said that, most of his followers left. They're thinking they're misunderstanding him. They're taking him literally there, like cannibalism or something like that. And most of them left. And so we know that it's figurative that he's talking. Eating his body and drinking his blood means that we rely entirely on him for reconciling us to God. We have to take him in to ourselves. And that's what it means there. Just like the Israelites had to rely on that brazen serpent that Moses lifted up on the pole. It didn't make any sense. There's all these poisonous snakes around biting, and people are dropping and dying. And to live, I'm being bit by these snakes, but to live, I'm supposed to keep fixed on this serpent on a pole. That doesn't make any sense. To do that, you've got to trust God, because it doesn't make any sense. This is the kind of thing that he's talking about here, okay? That kind of relying on Jesus, not just intellectual belief. So now I want to get into the 5 different offerings, and I've got those on the next slide here. So the burnt offering is called in Hebrew olah, and it means that which goes up. That's why it's so important to say smoke, because that's what goes up. The entire offering ascends to God. It symbolizes complete consecration and divine acceptance, not wrath. This is not about wrath. It's not destruction. The fire symbolizes purification, not destruction. Okay? And an individual who brings a burnt offering is declaring, I'm all in. I surrender all of myself, my actions, my thoughts, my desires to God for his purpose. I'm completely in. That's what the burnt offering symbolizes. And Jesus is our burnt offering. He gave himself completely for us. He obeyed and he surrendered on our behalf. And when you read in the Leviticus chapter 1 about the fat, this means the choicest or the best. So the symbolism here is Christ gave his highest and his best for us, right? He gave his best. Nothing complacent about that. So our response is no complacency from us either. We have to be completely consecrated to God. That's essential for a true relationship with him. We got to give him all of ourselves, our highest and our best. The next one is the grain offering, and if you look in the King James, it calls it the meat offering. I find that confusing because today when we say meat, we're thinking beef, filet mignon, chicken. It doesn't mean that. In 1611, meat meant food. So if you read the chapter 2, it's plain that it's talking about grain, okay? But it says meat. So you might want to make a note to yourself, grain offering is a better translation. And mincha means to bestow or to give a gift. That's what it means there. That's what that grain offering means. So the burnt offering represents the consecration of the offerer's entire life. The grain offering represents consecration of the entire fruit of his labor. It's all about the fruit of the labor for that person. So it can't be any plant. It's all plants, no animals. It can't be anything that's grown in the wild. It's got to be labor, my human labor. I planted this, I grew it, I cultivated it, and then when I do it, I ground it up and I sifted it and then I cooked it. So it's got to be the product of human labor. And when you read in there the memorial to God in chapter 2, verse 2, this is meaning that God notices, he graciously notices what you're offering, and he accepts it. He accepts your work. That's what it means by memorial. It doesn't mean that somebody died. And then the application here for Christ, the grain offering points to Christ consecrating not just himself, but his works to the Father. And in him, our imperfect works find acceptance, right? I mean, this book, for example, you're going to come away with an imperfect understanding, but God will accept it. He'll accept it. Whatever you do for him, if your heart's in the right place, he'll accept it thanks to Christ, okay? And so then our response is that we must give God our absolute best. We've got to give him our first fruit, our best fruit, and it needs to be presented to him in the best possible way. So number 3 is the peace offering. And this, I mentioned this before, the same victim is now the food, okay? And in the Hebrew, the name peace offering literally means sacrifice for friendship. And so the victim whose blood atoned now becomes the food. And this anticipates Jesus' words again in John chapter 6, where he said, my flesh is food indeed, and he who eats me will live. This ran a lot of people off. Notice also in Leviticus chapter 7, verse 18, when it's talking about the peace offering there, it says that the offering cannot go beyond the third day. That's not right. You've got to consume this offering before the third day finishes. Don't let it go. And this pictures the resurrection of Christ. He was on the third day he rose from the dead. He didn't stay in the grave more than 3 days there. And so that anticipates his resurrection as our living bread. The choicest parts, you'll read fat and caul of liver, all those things burn on the altar. That's the best part of the animal. That part goes to God. And then the brisket, which is the cut that's closest to the heart, and the right thigh, the brisket symbolizes love and devotion, and the right thigh symbolizes strength or power. Those go to the priests. And then everything that's remaining goes to the offerer to share with his family and friends and guests at his house there, okay? And so the application here, Christ is our peace offering. He gave his highest and his best, perfect love, perfect obedience to the Father. The brisket, the right thigh, his service as our high priest is distinguished by love and strength, supreme authority. He's our supreme authority. There's nobody higher than that. And then the remaining flesh, Christ shares himself with us and fellow believers. And the peace offering for us, it points to the Lord's Supper now. And one of these days, the marriage supper of the Lamb in the future there in Revelation chapter 19. And obviously, it also symbolizes eternal fellowship with him, not one day, but now. Really, okay? So then the sin offering is next. This is the word means, kata'ah means to sin. So by extension, this is referring to the offering about sin, addressing our sin. It's designed for our sins of ignorance, rashness, or you didn't mean to do it. It was an accident, mistake. It teaches us that ignorance doesn't cancel our guilt, our responsibility, but God provides a way to deal with it. That's what the sin offering teaches us. And it says in there that, this is in chapter 4 as well as chapter 6, the blood is applied to the horns of the altar. This is underscoring expiation. And if you go to Leviticus chapter 16, it's describing the Day of Atonement. Here it's saying that the sacrifice is to be on the altar, but then when you get to the burning part, it's taken outside of the camp. And why does that matter? This is anticipating Jesus' suffering outside the gate in Hebrews 13. So it's just one thing after another that's pointing to Christ. And the application, of course, is that Christ bore our sin under judgment, and he not only atones, which means to cover by shedding his blood, but he removes our sin. And I want to be careful not to confuse anybody about this. The best way I can understand this is if you could take a rod and put it in a glass of water, and you look at the side, it would look like the rod is bent, right? Because light travels at a different speed in air than it does in the water. From our perspective, we still have a sin nature, and we're still wrestling with our sin. We're crooked, we're bent. But from God's perspective, that rod is straight. We're straight. We got the righteousness of Christ placed upon us. He credits us with righteousness of Christ. And it's a done deal from his perspective. He can see above the physical phenomenon, space and time. He can see above that, his perspective. So I'm not saying that you're sinless. Certainly not saying that. I'm saying as far as he's concerned, you're credited with the righteousness of Christ the moment you put your trust in him and you believe on him. So that's important to notice in the book of Leviticus as well. Last but not least, we have what's called in the King James the guilt offering, and I want to be careful about that word because that could sound like emotion. I feel so bad, I feel so guilty. It's not that kind of guilt. It is trespass. It is you have committed some offense, whether on purpose or not. You got to make it right, okay? You're liable for what you did wrong, even if it was a mistake, even if it was an accident. And the focus of the guilt offering or trespass offering is debt and restitution. And you've got to make things right and add another 20%. And the trespass offering is about, I've wronged God, I've offended him, and maybe my neighbor, maybe somebody I know, and atonement must include satisfaction. I've got to make it right, okay? And it talks about that. And obviously there's a prophecy in Isaiah 53 about Christ. Christ made his soul a guilt offering, satisfying God's claims and settling our debts. And so he bore our guilt and our trespasses against God. He paid for the damages of our sin. He made right all of my wrong. He went beyond simply making things right. He squares me away with God so I'm at peace with him and can walk with him in peace and be reconciled, which is mankind's greatest need, by the way. So as we're running out of time here, I want to still stay on this slide here, but I want to go through the order of these offerings as they're presented in Leviticus and for us. When I'm thinking about getting saved, putting my trust in Christ, it seems that the first action should be the burnt offering. The burnt offering is I need to put my trust in him. I don't know exactly how, but I've got to put my trust in him. That's the burnt, completely, okay? And then the next step would be I need to deal with my sin. Once I put my trust in him, he forgives my sin and makes reparations for my sin. That's the sin offering, and the guilt offering or the trespass offering. Once my sin is dealt with, now I'm able to offer God my best fruit, my best service, and enjoy fellowship with him. That's your grain offering and peace offering. That's the order that it should be in the book of Leviticus, because we come to him broken. We got to commit to him, then deal with the sin, and then we can enjoy service to him and fellowship with him, right? But that's not how the book of Leviticus is organized. It's organized in a way that reflects Christ, okay? The first offering, it's the burnt offering. Christ gave himself completely, perfect obedience, submission to the Father. But he didn't have any sin to deal with. So what's the second offering is in chapter 2, is not the sin offering, but the grain offering. He didn't need to reconcile himself to God the Father. He submits in perfect obedience to God the Father. Then he gives the best of his fruit, the best of his labor, sinless service to the Father. He didn't need to get right with God because he is God and he was already right. And so then that's the grain offering. And then the third one isn't the trespass, it's the peace offering. He didn't need to get rid of any sin or make reparation. He gave his perfect love and strength to the Father in perfect fellowship. And these three are the sweet savor offerings depicting his person, who he is. The other two offerings that are in this order here, they're the non-sweet savor offerings, and they're depicting his work dealing with our sin, not his, because he didn't have any. So number 4 is the sin offering. He gave himself to atone and remove my sin. And then trespass offering, he gave himself to make reparation for the damage that I've caused by my sin. And I don't mean my deeds, I mean who I am. Really, it's me as a sinful person. So then the other thing really quickly is why these different animals? And I'll be quick about this. And the burnt offering, the animals could be a bull, sheep, bird, right? Different kinds. It's not about the value of the animal for the burnt offering. It's about total consecration. And if I don't have a bull or a sheep, I can still come and give myself completely over to God, and that would be accepted. Okay, that's why there's different animals for the burnt offering. In the grain offering, there are no animals, but God does say this. You got to bring fine flour, and he allows it to be baked in an oven or baking pan or in a frying pan. And again, he's accommodating people. Not everybody in this time and place would have had an oven, but everybody would have had a frying pan. And so I want to come to him and give him a gift. I don't have an oven to cook my flour in, but I do have a frying pan. He made a way for you to give a gift to him if you're not a person of means. The peace offering, he allows different animals, but he maintains the requirement they got to be without blemish. So he has the high standards there. The sin offering, he requires different animals, but here, the sin offering is not about the the total consecration, the reason why there's different animals is he doesn't just allow them, he requires different animals. And it depends on the rank and the position of the person who's giving the offering. The high priest has to give the most expensive. The nation has to give the most expensive. That's a bull. A ruler has to give a male goat. That's not as expensive as a bull, but it's more expensive than a pigeon, okay? And then the common person brings a female goat or a lamb. And if you can't afford that, you can bring 2 birds. And if you don't even have 2 birds, you can bring 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour, which is 3 to 4 pounds of flour. So the common person has the cheapest, least expensive that you can bring. So it's the burnt offering, different animals, because I want to be able to participate and give myself all the way in. But the sin offering, it's required. You have to give the most expensive because you're the high priest. You're more responsible. You're the leader, and you have to give the most expensive. And so in the trespass offering, there's the ram, full restoration, plus 20%. The best example I can give you for that, of course, would be Zacchaeus. Remember, he realized he had done wrong, and he restored to the people that he had wronged fourfold. This is beyond the 20%. So it shows you that he had a heart change there. So the conclusion, as we wrap this up, I got another slide over here, maybe 2 more slides. That's showing you the actions and the offerings, but then the slide after that, Leviticus is really important, not only because it's the first book in the Bible that gives us the gospel and our response that God expects. It shows us that God invites us. We can't come to him any other way. So forget about your merit or how good you think you are. We're not able to come to him unless he invites us, and thank goodness he does. He does invite us. And also, Jesus makes it possible for us to come to God. And so Jesus modeled complete surrender and obedience. That's the burnt offering. He modeled highest service. That's the grain. Perfect love and strength and fellowship with God. That's the peace offering. And he shed his blood and gave his life to atone for, remove, and make reparations for my sin. That's the sin and the trespass offering. He did all that. And in gratitude and respect, well, we respond by accepting his atonement and living in holiness. That's what this book is about here. We present him to God, lay our hand on him, relying solely on him, sincerely acknowledge that each of us is directly responsible for his death. And after that, he, as our high priest, takes over. He goes to work. He sprinkles his blood. He presents the blood to the Father on the altar, who accepts it, credits us with the righteousness of Christ. This is the imputed righteousness there. And since we're reconciled to God, fully reconciled to him, we respond in gratitude, firmly resolved to offer him the best that we can give, the best service that we can give him. And so that's the grain. And then to love him with all of our heart, all of our soul and might, that's the peace, by living in holiness, set apart entirely for him. So Leviticus shows us how to walk. That's a pathway. There's a trail on the ridge of that mountain there that's in England, I believe it is. It shows us how to walk this narrow way between 2 deep chasms, legalism and cheap grace, okay? You can't do either one of them. Leviticus precludes either one of those. It's easy for us to assume coming to church, reading the Bible, praying to God, even on your knees, that he likes me better because I do that. He doesn't do that. And it's also easy to drag our feet in surrendering areas of our life to God, or respond with what I call slow walk obedience, right? You're kind of reluctantly going along and not really all in. And that's because whether we realize it or not, we abuse his grace, okay? And so Leviticus teaches that veering into legalism is out, because he calls us and grants us access to him because of who he is, not because of who I am or anything I've done. And it teaches us that veering into the chasm of anywhere in the chasm at all, veering in that direction towards cheap grace, is also out, because atonement, it's inseparable from holiness. The one who's forgiven has got to desire to be pursuing holiness. Got to be, okay? And so the challenge here, first challenge, is that I want to encourage you not to be intimidated by this book. Study this book. Use that handout that I've given you, and study it from a Christ-centered lens. And please Don't worry about what you might not be able to grasp. God will accept your sincere efforts if you try. He will teach you what you're able to learn right now, okay? So keep that in mind. And a little more practical, J. Vernon McGee, his messages on Leviticus and through the Bible, they're very accessible. If you want something deeper, I found Dr. Kellogg's book on Leviticus indispensable. I mean, it's more difficult, but it's, if you want a deep dive, that one's a really good book, even though it's from like 1906. It's still the best book out there on the book of Leviticus. So the challenge that I have on the next slide here is, by the grace of God, through what Christ did, get right and live right with God. Surrender completely to Him. Rely solely on Christ to atone, remove, and make reparations for your sin. Rely on Christ as our example and give God your highest and best service with all the abilities that He gives you, and let Him do His best work in you, and love Him and trust His strength and supreme authority, and enjoy eternal fellowship with Him now, not just someday, but now. Enjoy that now. And if you do enjoy that, you'll want to tell other people. All right, thank you.